Welcome everybody. My name is Isabella and I'm goth. I love being goth, which is why I made a whole magazine about alternative subcultures. So the first question I'd like to address is how does my product use or challenge conventions and how does it represent social groups or issues? My entire magazine challenges the conventions of what you would see in a standard fashion or beauty magazine. Alternative means different, or in better terms, away from the mainstream. So by exploring the genre of my magazine in and of itself, that is challenging conventions of what is expected of a fashion magazine. Now, when it came to this genre specifically of alternative fashion, I did stay within the conventions shown in other magazines that I studied and referenced often, like Alt Magazine, Bricks, Decapon, and Gothic Beauty. A large theme that I saw within these magazines is that they often spoke about issues not directly regarding fashion or makeup like any other magazine would. They spoke about real-world issues that affected the groups of people that would create or inspire the fashion or themes shown within these spaces. Even though I stayed within the realm of fashion and beauty, I wanted to capture that same care for my magazine as I wrote about the changes that social media had on these alternative subcultures. I also did a lot of research on what exactly built these subcultures up and how the internet had its effect on it. I went back into the past, looking at the history of these subcultures and tried to make the looks I displayed on my magazine as authentic as possible to appeal to my audience, in which I would describe to be for teens or young adults that are either interested or already within these spaces. I represented a large part of the alternative community in what I address in my article, speaking on major concerns people are having today online as they see how subcultures and styles keep evolving, especially with how widespread and fast the internet is. I also represented teenagers that are part of alternative spaces, as many of my friends helped me work on this by allowing me to interview them and volunteering as models for this project. I valued their input deeply as they are engaged within this community, like I am, but again belong to different spaces, which was helpful in my article to consider multiple sides to a complicated topic. I challenge conventions also by taking a group that is seen to be smaller or often bullied by straying from the mainstream and made them look powerful by making sure to angle my camera at low angles, making them appear much taller. To further accentuate this point, I also had models stand on things and followed a theme in the outdoor shoots with having pockets of sunlight shine onto them, which again adds to that theme of empowering them as I am shining light onto them and not concealing them within the shadows. The next question I would like to address is how does my product engage with audiences and how would it be distributed as a real media text? I would say that my magazine would be distributed online and in print, as I see many magazines offer both options nowadays. My product is engaged with its audience by appealing to authenticity within the visuals and the topics shared through the article. However, there is a lack of content which I had prepared extensively for, and due to time constraints, I ended up scrapping at the last minute. I feel that if I had been able to create those extra articles, it would have been a much better magazine that included a lot of the research I had done about goth and emo, which could have appealed to the audience more, as not everybody is insanely educated on the history of their subcultures or how they blend into each other. And by blend into each other, I mean how goth sort of evolved into emo, how goth was a product of post-punk, and how all of this sort of like blends into each other. There is a lot of like intersectionality when it comes to a lot of these subcultures and how they came up to be, which I think is really interesting. But again, I did a lot of research on this and I didn't really get to write anything about it or really like express this research that I had done because of, I had no time. I couldn't really write 3 articles. It was a lot of work and it was sort of like bad on my part because, I couldn't manage my time pretty well with it. But again, I was happy with the outcome of what happened with my overall feature article. But I do feel that it could have appealed better to, my audience and what I wanted to represent if I had those extra articles and that extra like information. But again, I want to then move on to the next question, which was, how did your production skills develop throughout this project? I felt that my photography and photo editing skills improved significantly while working on this project. I also learned how crucial photo editing is to make a production like this. As I began to understand how to use these programs like Lightroom in a way that fit the style of my magazine, it was a lot easier and it took me a lot less time to actually edit these photos because I was actually understanding what I needed to do. I had exactly in my head what I wanted to envision and put out there. So in the beginning it took me a really long time. It took me like hours just to edit like 2 pictures. And I was like, oh, I don't know how I'm gonna get all of this done. But in the end, I kind of like, I found my groove with it. When I looked at the before and after images I had edited, I didn't even realize how much it had changed. That being said, I feel like with the first couple of images I edited, there was moments where I got carried away with the pictures became far too vibrant and sort of lost its way with all the colors that made it look less natural, which the point of my magazine was to sort of show these subcultures in a natural or authentic light, since I had felt they were very sensationalized by trends and social media. I also felt that my skills in makeup improved, as this was the first time I did makeup on people that was for my own creative process. Now, I had done makeup on people several other times, but every other time it was like for a request. So it was somebody requesting me for them to do their makeup in a way that they wanted it to be on their face. But for this, I was really allowed to just have my own freedom with this and have my own ideas. And I felt so satisfied after seeing the pictures that I took after like being able to convey these ideas onto these people's faces, and they were really happy with it as well. And it was a really satisfying process, and I felt that I, as somebody who does makeup intensively, grew a lot within this process. So the next question I would like to address is, how do I integrate technology, software, hardware, and online in this project? So for photo editing, I use Lightroom, and then I use Canva to organize the magazine how I wanted it to look. But I had to end up using Canva after attempting to use InDesign, and decided that InDesign would be too time consuming because I would have to learn a whole new program when I already knew how to use Canva. And it was a disappointing point in my process because I wanted to use InDesign because I had heard great things about it, and I'm also not a huge fan of Canva, but I was really running out of time at this point, and I needed to just use Canva because it was something I already knew how to use, and it would just be a lot easier and quicker for me to get through that than going into InDesign and sort of like taking baby steps with it. I utilize a lot of sources online, though, as I mentioned before, to really get everything right. I wanted to make sure I understood what I was representing before beginning any of the production that had to do with makeup or any of the styles or anything like that. And so I would like to address, my magazine in detail as I go through it. So for the cover page, I had made flat plans of what I wanted it to look like. So I made 2 flat plans, and I posted them on my blog as part of my process. But I made 2 flat plans, and I wanted one of them to be either like a grunge or emo sort of style, or I wanted it to be a goth. But I didn't know whether it to be like trad goth or like modern trad goth, so what you see me in right now, or more so like 80s goth like you see in like a lot of like celebrities from that time. But I ended up making it modern like trad goth because I think it sort of like shows how this is what we see now, and this is like when you say goth, you usually think of somebody that looks like this, and that's because of what the effect that social media has had on these subcultures. And I kind of wanted to represent that even before getting into the styles and what they looked like in the past and then after. And then I made it Twilight feature because I thought it kind of really mixed in well with the sort of like topic that I was talking about with the styles and everything like that. It was just I just felt like it had a nice ring to it as well. And I went through a lot of title options, but I had one that was like hidden in plain sight because again, I kind of wanted to shine light on these alternative subcultures, but it was too wordy and I felt like it didn't really represent what I was really trying to go for. It didn't feel like a fashion magazine. It just kind of felt like a title. But yeah. And then for the table of contents, I took a lot of inspiration from Alt Magazine and a lot of their features. And then I added the model page because I did a lot of profile like interviews with like a survey, and I didn't really want that to go to waste as I did a lot of research into like viewing in how like the different subcultures that these people, my friends, were in, and like the decisions that they made on the overall magazine. And this was also like my way of saying like thanks to them to working onto this like project with me because they were a great help. All the pictures turned out great, and I couldn't have done this without them. So I felt that it was sort of like it felt right to make this page about them. But this was also taking inspiration from Decopon magazines, where they have a lot of their magazines just is a lot of profiles of internet celebrities or people that are within those alternative spaces, but they take people from like a lot of different alternative spaces and they just they interview them. They're like, oh, what's your favorite style, or what do you take inspiration from here, or what do you describe your style as, or what music do you listen to that influences this. And I thought that was pretty cool. And they also changed the pages to look how each style is represented with the person that they're interviewing, and I thought that was also pretty interesting. But yeah, since most of my models describe themselves as emo, I felt like it wasn't necessary to do that because it would have been just a lot of pages of not that much content. But I did post all the models here, and then I posted what subculture or what style they align themselves with. And then it might look like a mistake, but for one of the models there is no subculture or style under it, and it's because he doesn't follow any subculture. He just believes that he wears what he wears and that's it, right? So I thought that was really interesting, and I actually like highlighted that in my feature article, which is the next page, for one of the interview questions, but that was his response was, while labels and identification of styles itself are important, they shouldn't make someone's mind to see things as black and white, this or that. I don't really keep up with labeling. As for me, I find it ultimately pointless. I put on what I like, and that's that. And I felt that gave in a lot of like insight for the article, because a lot of these people, and which is why I titled the article "Am I Goth Enough?" because a lot of these people like to ask the questions like, am I really following this? Am I following that? And it's just like a lot of the things with these subcultures is that it's about like non-conformity and being unique. So that's a lot of like the main point that I wanted to highlight in my article, because it's kind of gotten really twisted. A lot of people think they need this like big checklist or guidebook to be goth or to be emo or to be punk or anything like that. And yes, for like some of them it does really follow with political views, which is why a lot of people think like that. But when it comes to the fashion and stuff like that, a lot of it is just DIY, making your own shirts or making your own like makeup styles. None of it has to be, following a certain rule. And then lastly, for the spread that I did with the goth or emo, which is where I did the indoor shoots and I did the makeup, I did plan on, again, as I mentioned earlier, I did plan on making articles for these, which is why I did so much research on it, but I didn't have enough time, so I couldn't get to it. But I was happy with how this turned out, because I felt like it, instead of like making a article on how these things are different or how it's changed over time. I could just show like the difference, like the stark like contrast of how 80s goth looks and then you have goth now, and it's really different. And a lot of it just comes from, you know, how we viewed the media of like back in the 80s. A lot of these pictures were taken in black and white, even though we probably had color back then. But because of that, now we paint our faces white, you know. And it's not to say that 80s goth didn't paint their faces white, but it wasn't as common. And it was really interesting to kind of see that evolution of how we see like the makeup turns out now to how it looked back then. And then it's the same thing for the emo, although the emo is less of a dramatic change. It was just, you know, 90s emo was a lot less effort. It was more like smudged out, it was messy and everything like that. It was probably because people didn't have like access to great makeup products back then, or they didn't care as much, or they were just doing this because they wanted to and not because they wanted to make a statement out of it. But I just thought that was really interesting, and I again wanted to share that through my magazine, on seeing the differences between the makeup styles, between the fashion and everything like that, as it has evolved, and how we see it now with like the internet and social media. Again, kind of tying back into the whole theme of the article. Thank you very much. That was my podcast and creative critical reflection.